Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her helmet one final time as she walked across the tarmac toward her F-16 Fighting Falcon. The morning sun cast long shadows across the air base, and the familiar smell of jet fuel mixed with the crisp desert air. At 28 years old, she had already logged over 2,000 flight hours, but today felt different. Today, she would finally prove that her call sign Eagle-7 meant something more than what her squadron mates thought it did. The other pilots in her squadron had given her that call sign as a joke. They claimed it stood for Eagle-7 up because she was always too bubbly and optimistic for a fighter pilot. Behind her back, they whispered that she got her position because the Air Force needed to meet diversity quotas, not because she earned it through skill. Sarah had heard the whispers, seen the rolled eyes, and felt the cold shoulders more times than she cared to count. Her squadron leader, Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, had been one of the few who treated her with respect from day one. He saw past the politics and the prejudices that seemed to follow female pilots wherever they went. During their morning briefing, he had pulled her aside. "Chun, I know what some of these idiots are saying," Colonel Rodriguez had said quietly. "But I've seen your test scores, your simulation results, and your performance in training. You're not here because of any quota system. You're here because you're one of the best pilots I've ever worked with." Sarah appreciated his words, but she knew that respect had to be earned in the cockpit, not in a briefing room. Her fellow pilots would need to see her skills firsthand before they would accept her as an equal. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence reports indicated that a group of enemy fighters had been spotted near the border, potentially planning an incursion into friendly airspace. Sarah's squadron was tasked with intercepting and neutralizing the threat if necessary. It was a routine patrol mission, the kind that experienced pilots handled dozens of times throughout their careers. As Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection, she could hear some of the other pilots talking near their aircraft. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a cocky pilot with sandy hair and an attitude to match, was holding court with a small group. "I still can't believe they're sending Princess Chun on a real mission," Morrison said with a smirk. "What's she going to do if we actually encounter hostiles? Ask them politely to leave." Several pilots laughed at his comment. Sergeant Tom Bradley, a veteran with 15 years of experience, shook his head. "Come on, Jake. She passed all the same tests we did." "Yeah, right," Morrison replied. "We all know the standards are different for women. They probably let her slide on half the requirements." Sarah's jaw tightened as she overheard the conversation, but she forced herself to focus on her equipment check. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only made things worse. The best response would come through her actions, not her words. Captain Mike Stevens, another squadron member, noticed Sarah's expression. Unlike Morrison, Stevens had always been professional with her, though he remained somewhat distant. "Look, maybe we should give her a chance," he said to the group. Colonel Rodriguez wouldn't put anyone on this mission if he didn't think they could handle it. Morrison scoffed. "Rodriguez is just playing politics. Mark my words, when things get serious, Eagle-7 up here is going to fold like a house of cards." The conversation died down as Colonel Rodriguez approached the flight line. He moved from pilot to pilot, conducting final checks and offering last-minute advice. When he reached Sarah, his expression was serious but encouraging. "Remember what we talked about in training," he said quietly. "Trust your instincts, follow your training, and don't let anyone else's opinion affect your performance. You belong here, Chun. Now go show them what a real pilot looks like." Sarah nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." As the pilots began climbing into their cockpits, Sarah took one last look around the base. This was her moment to prove herself, not just to her squadron mates, but to herself. She had worked harder than most people could imagine to get to this point. Years of training, countless hours of study, and more criticism than anyone should have to endure had brought her here. The F-16's cockpit felt like home as Sarah settled into her seat. Every switch, every button, every display was exactly where she expected it to be. She had spent so many hours in simulators and training flights that the aircraft felt like an extension of her own body. Her radio crackled to life as the squadron prepared for takeoff. Eagle Squadron, this is Tower Control. You are cleared for departure. Weather conditions are optimal. Visibility is excellent. Intelligence reports suggest possible hostile activity approximately 200 miles northeast of your current position. Colonel Rodriguez's voice came through the radio next. Eagle Squadron, form up for departure. Eagle-1 through Eagle-6, standard formation. Eagle-7, you'll be flying wing position with Eagle-3. Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and determination as she fired up her engines. The powerful turbines spun to life with a roar that she could feel in her chest. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed about since she was a little girl watching fighter jets streak across the sky at air shows. As the squadron taxied toward the runway, Sarah could see some of the ground crew watching. She knew that word about her presence on this mission had spread throughout the base. Some are probably curious to see how the female pilot would perform. Others might be hoping she would prove herself. And undoubtedly, a few were expecting her to fail. The tower controller's voice filled her headset again. Eagle Squadron, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting out there. One by one, the F-16s rolled down the runway and lifted into the bright blue sky. Sarah's aircraft was second to last in the takeoff sequence. As she aligned her fighter with the runway's centerline, she took a deep breath and pushed the throttle forward. The acceleration was immediate and intense. Within seconds, her F-16 was racing down the runway at over 150 miles per hour. Sarah pulled back gently on the stick, and the aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing rapidly into the clear morning air. As the squadron formed up at 15,000 feet, Sarah marveled at the view below. The landscape stretched out in all directions, a mixture of desert, mountains, and scattered cities. From this height, the world looked peaceful and serene, giving no hint of the potential danger that lay ahead. Colonel Rodriguez's voice came through the radio as the formation leveled off. Eagle Squadron, maintain current heading and altitude. We should reach the patrol area in approximately 30 minutes. Stay alert and keep your eyes open. Intelligence suggests we might encounter enemy aircraft today. Sarah checked her instruments and weapon systems one final time. Everything was functioning perfectly. Her radar was clear, her missiles were armed and ready, and her cannon had a full load of ammunition. Whatever they encountered out there, she was prepared to handle it. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with his usual cocky tone. Eagle-3 here. I hope we actually see some action today. It's been too quiet lately. Be careful what you wish for, replied Captain Stevens. Enemy pilots aren't like the targets in our training exercises. They shoot back. As the squadron continued its flight toward the patrol area, Sarah found herself thinking about her journey to this moment. Growing up, she had always been fascinated by aviation. Her father had been a commercial airline pilot, and she had spent countless hours listening to his stories about flying. When she announced her intention to become a fighter pilot, many people had tried to discourage her. The military is no place for a young woman, her grandmother had said. Why don't you become a teacher or a nurse instead? Even her father, despite his support, had expressed concerns. The fighter pilot community is very traditional, he had warned her. You're going to face challenges that male pilots will never encounter. But Sarah had been determined. She excelled in college, earning a degree in aerospace engineering while maintaining perfect grades. Her performance in officer candidate school had been exemplary, and her flight training scores had consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class. Yet despite all her achievements, she still found herself having to prove her worth over and over again. Every new assignment brought fresh skepticism, new colleagues who questioned whether she truly belonged in a fighter cockpit. The radio interrupted her thoughts as Colonel Rodriguez announced their approach to the patrol area. Eagle Squadron, we're entering the operational zone. Spread out to patrol formation and keep your radars active. Report any contacts immediately. Sarah adjusted her position relative to the other aircraft and activated her long-range sensors. The sky around them appeared empty, but she knew that enemy aircraft could appear without warning. Modern fighter jets could cover vast distances in minutes, and a peaceful sky could become a battlefield in seconds. As the minutes passed, the squadron maintained their patrol pattern, methodically scanning the airspace for any signs of hostile activity. Sarah's radar swept back and forth across the horizon, searching for the distinctive signature of enemy aircraft. Then, without warning, her radar screen lit up with multiple contacts. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she processed what she was seeing. 6 aircraft, flying in formation, approaching from the northeast at high speed. Their flight pattern and approach vector matched intelligence reports about enemy fighter squadrons. Sarah keyed her radio immediately. Eagle-7 to Eagle-1. I have multiple contacts bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 50 miles. 6 aircraft in formation, approaching fast. Colonel Rodriguez's voice came back instantly. Eagle-1 to all units. Confirm Eagle-7's contact report. All aircraft, prepare for possible engagement. Within seconds, the other pilots confirmed Sarah's sighting on their own radar screens. What had started as a routine patrol was about to become something much more serious. Eagle Squadron, this is Eagle-1, Colonel Rodriguez announced. We have confirmed hostile aircraft inbound. All units arm weapons and prepare for engagement. Rules of engagement are in effect. Fire only if fired upon or if enemy aircraft enter restricted airspace. Sarah's hands moved automatically across her control panels, arming her missiles and preparing her aircraft for combat. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but actually facing enemy fighters was entirely different from any simulation she had ever experienced. The hostile aircraft continued their approach, now clearly visible on everyone's radar screens. Sarah could feel the tension building throughout the squadron as 6 American F-16s prepared to face 6 enemy fighters in what could become a deadly aerial battle. Lieutenant Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with characteristic bravado. Finally, some real action. Let's show these guys what American pilots can do. But Colonel Rodriguez quickly established control of the situation. Eagle Squadron, maintain formation and follow standard intercept procedures. We're going to identify these aircraft first and attempt to turn them away from restricted airspace. Weapons tight until further orders. As the 2 groups of aircraft closed the distance between them, Sarah realized that this was her moment of truth. Everything she had worked for, every hour of training, every criticism she had endured, had led to this point. In the next few minutes, she would either prove herself as a capable fighter pilot or confirm the doubts that some of her colleagues still harbored about her abilities. The enemy aircraft were now close enough for visual identification through her targeting systems. Sarah could see that they were flying modern fighters, well-equipped and professionally piloted. This would not be an easy encounter if it escalated to actual combat. Colonel Rodriguez's voice filled the airwaves one final time before the real action began. Eagle Squadron, enemy aircraft are now entering restricted airspace. We are cleared to engage if they do not respond to warnings. All units, stay sharp and follow your training. This is what we've prepared for. The radio crackled with tension as Colonel Rodriguez attempted to establish communication with the approaching aircraft. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force Eagle Squadron. You're entering restricted airspace. Identify yourselves immediately and alter course to heading 270. Silence filled the airwaves for several long seconds. Sarah maintained her position in the formation while keeping her eyes locked on a radar display. The 6 enemy aircraft continued their approach without any deviation in course or speed. Their formation was tight and professional, indicating experienced pilots who knew exactly what they were doing. Unknown aircraft, this is your final warning, Colonel Rodriguez repeated. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Alter course immediately or face military action. Still no response. Sarah could see the enemy formation more clearly now through her targeting system. They were flying what appeared to be advanced fighter aircraft, possibly Su-35s or a similar model. These were not outdated planes flown by inexperienced pilots. This was a professional military force, and they were clearly not intimidated by the presence of American fighters. Lieutenant Morrison's voice burst through the radio with obvious excitement. Eagle-3 here. They're not responding to warnings, and they're definitely military aircraft. Request permission to engage. Negative, Eagle-3, Colonel Rodriguez replied firmly. We follow proper procedures. Continue attempts at communication. Sarah admired the colonel's discipline, but she could sense the growing tension throughout the squadron. Every pilot knew that once enemy aircraft entered restricted airspace without responding to warnings, they had the legal authority to engage. The question was whether these enemy pilots would give them a choice. Captain Stevens' voice joined the radio chatter. Eagle-4 here. I'm detecting weapons systems activation on multiple enemy aircraft. They appear to be preparing for engagement. Sarah's heart rate increased as she confirmed Stevens' observation on her own instruments. The enemy aircraft were indeed powering up their targeting systems and missile guidance radars. This was no longer a simple airspace violation. These pilots were preparing for air-to-air combat. Eagle Squadron, Colonel Rodriguez announced with grim determination. Enemy aircraft have activated weapons systems and continue to advance into restricted airspace. We are now authorized to engage. Repeat, we are authorized to engage. All units, execute defensive spread formation and prepare for combat. The next few seconds transformed the peaceful sky into a battlefield. The American F-16s dispersed into combat formation while the enemy aircraft did the same. Sarah found herself paired with Captain Stevens as they maneuvered to engage two of the enemy fighters. The first missile launch came from the enemy formation. A sleek white contrail streaked across the sky as one of the hostile aircraft fired at Lieutenant Morrison's F-16. Morrison immediately began evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares while pulling his aircraft into a sharp climbing turn. Eagle-3 is under attack. Morrison shouted over the radio. I've got a missile inbound. Sarah watched as Morrison's aircraft twisted and turned through the sky, successfully evading the enemy missile. Her respect for his piloting skills increased despite her personal feelings about his attitude. In combat, personal conflicts became irrelevant. Every American pilot out here was someone she needed to protect. Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. Eagle Squadron, engage at will. Take them down. Sarah locked her targeting system onto the nearest enemy aircraft and fired her first AIM-120 missile. The weapon streaked away from her F-16 at supersonic speed, its guidance system tracking the enemy fighter with deadly precision. She immediately began maneuvering to avoid return fire while keeping track of her missile's progress. The enemy pilot was skilled, deploying countermeasures and pulling into a steep dive to evade Sarah's missile. She watched as her weapon passed harmlessly behind the enemy aircraft, exploding uselessly in the empty sky. Her first shot had missed, but she wasn't discouraged. Combat was unpredictable, and even the best pilots rarely achieve kills with their first missile. Captain Stevens was engaged with another enemy fighter about 2 miles to Sarah's left. She could see both aircraft maneuvering violently as they tried to gain advantage over each other. Contrails from their wingtips marked their aerial dance as each pilot attempted to position himself for a killing shot. Eagle-4 here, Stevens called out breathlessly. I'm in a turning fight with this guy. He's good, really good. Sarah was dealing with her own problems as the enemy fighter she had missed now turned to engage her directly. The hostile pilot was clearly experienced, positioning his aircraft to force Sarah into a disadvantageous situation. She found herself in exactly the kind of close-range dogfight that every fighter pilot both dreaded and trained for constantly. The enemy aircraft pulled into a tight turn, trying to get behind Sarah's F-16 where he could achieve a missile lock. Sarah responded by pulling her own aircraft into an even tighter turn, feeling the tremendous G-forces pressing her down into her seat. Her specialized flight suit inflated automatically, helping to maintain blood flow to her brain under the extreme acceleration. Years of training kicked in as Sarah maneuvered her aircraft through a series of complex aerial maneuvers. She pulled into a vertical climb, rolled inverted, then dove back toward the enemy fighter while trying to position herself for a shot. The enemy pilot matched her move for move, proving that he was indeed a skilled aviator. Lieutenant Morrison's voice erupted from the radio, with panic barely contained. I'm hit. I'm hit. Engine fire. Losing hydraulics. Sarah's heart sank as she caught a glimpse of Morrison's F-16 trailing smoke and losing altitude. Despite his arrogant attitude, Morrison was a fellow pilot and an American. Seeing him in trouble triggered every protective instinct she possessed. Eagle-3, this is Eagle-1. Colonel Rodriguez responded immediately. What's your status? Can you make it back to base? Negative, Morrison replied, his voice strained with effort. I'm going to have to punch out. Aircraft is not controllable. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of an ejection seat firing as Morrison abandoned his damaged aircraft. She caught a glimpse of his parachute deploying as his F-16 continued its uncontrolled descent toward the ground below. One American pilot was down, and the battle was far from over. The loss of Morrison's aircraft seemed to energize the enemy pilots, who pressed their attacks more aggressively. Sarah found herself facing two enemy fighters simultaneously as the pilot she had been dueling was joined by another hostile aircraft that had finished engaging a different target. This was the moment that would define her career. Two experienced enemy pilots in advanced aircraft were coordinating their attacks against her single F-16. Everything she had ever learned about air combat would be tested in the next few minutes. Failure meant death, not just for herself, but potentially for other American pilots who were depending on her to do her job. Sarah pulled her aircraft into a spiraling climb while keeping track of both enemy fighters on her radar. The first hostile aircraft was trying to achieve a missile lock from her left side, while the second was positioning itself for a gun attack from below. She had perhaps 10 seconds before one or both of them would be in position to fire. Instead of continuing her climb, Sarah suddenly rolled her F-16 inverted and pulled into a steep dive directly toward the lower enemy aircraft. This aggressive maneuver caught the enemy pilot off guard, forcing him to break off his attack to avoid a collision. Sarah fired a short burst from her 20mm cannon as the enemy fighter passed in front of her, but the shots went wide. The second enemy aircraft was still trying to achieve a missile lock from above. Sarah pulled her F-16 into a series of sharp turns while dispensing chaff and flares to confuse enemy targeting systems. She could hear the distinctive tone in her headset that indicated an enemy missile lock, followed immediately by the warning that a missile had been fired at her aircraft. Time seemed to slow down as Sarah executed a complex evasive maneuver she had practiced hundreds of times in training, but never performed in actual combat. She pulled her aircraft into a vertical climb while rolling to the right, then cut power and deployed her speed brakes to rapidly decelerate. The enemy missile, unable to match her sudden change in speed and direction, streaked past her aircraft and exploded harmlessly in the distance. Captain Stevens' voice filled the radio with excitement. Eagle-7, nice moves. You just made that missile look like a rookie shot. But Sarah didn't have time to appreciate the compliment. The two enemy aircraft were regrouping for another coordinated attack, and she was running low on both fuel and missiles. She had used 2 of her 4 AIM-120s without achieving a kill, and her fuel gauge showed that she was approaching the point where she would need to disengage and return to base. Colonel Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent instructions. Eagle Squadron, we need to wrap this up quickly. Fuel state is becoming critical for all aircraft. Sarah realized that this was her moment to prove herself once and for all. Instead of playing defensively and trying to survive until she could disengage, she decided to take the offensive. She turned her F-16 directly toward the nearest enemy aircraft and accelerated to maximum speed. The enemy pilot, apparently surprised by her aggressive approach, hesitated for just a moment. That moment was all Sarah needed. She achieved a perfect missile lock and fired her third AIM, 120 at close range. This time, her weapon found its mark. The enemy aircraft disappeared in a brilliant flash of flame and debris. Sarah had scored her first aerial victory, proving to herself and everyone else that she belonged in the fighter pilot community. But there was no time to celebrate. The second enemy aircraft was still out there, and the battle was not over. The remaining enemy pilot, having witnessed the destruction of his wingman, became even more aggressive in his attacks. Sarah could tell from his maneuvering that he was an exceptional pilot, possibly the squadron leader. This would be her most challenging opponent yet. The two aircraft engaged in a deadly spiral dance, each pilot trying to gain the upper hand through superior maneuvering and tactical thinking. Sarah's F-16 and the enemy fighter twisted and turned through the sky in a display of aerial combat that would have been beautiful if the stakes were not so deadly. Captain Stevens had successfully defeated his opponent and was now moving to assist Sarah with her remaining adversary. Eagle-7, this is Eagle-4. I'm coming to help. Keep him busy for another 30 seconds. But Sarah was determined to finish this fight herself. She had already proven that she could shoot down an enemy aircraft. Now she wanted to prove that she could defeat their best pilot in single combat. This was about more than just completing the mission. This was about earning the respect she had been seeking since the day she first put on a flight suit. The enemy pilot made a tactical error, pulling in a too tight a turn and temporarily losing airspeed. Sarah recognized the mistake immediately and capitalized on it with the precision of a surgeon. She positioned her F-16 perfectly and fired her final missile at point-blank range. Her second kill of the day was even more spectacular than the first. The enemy aircraft disintegrated completely, leaving only falling debris and a small parachute as evidence that it had ever existed. Eagle-7, this is Eagle-1, Colonel Rodriguez announced with obvious pride in his voice. Outstanding work. That's 2 confirmed kills. But the battle was not over yet. Sarah looked around the sky to assess the situation and realized that the American pilots had successfully defeated the entire enemy formation. 6 enemy aircraft had been destroyed with the loss of only Lieutenant Morrison's F-16, and Morrison had successfully ejected and would be rescued. As the squadron regrouped for the flight back to base, Sarah finally had a moment to process what had just happened. She had not only survived her first real air combat, but she had excelled at it. 2 enemy aircraft had fallen to her missiles, proving beyond any doubt that she was a capable fighter pilot. The flight back to base was markedly different from the morning's departure. The radio chatter had changed completely from the skeptical comments and jokes that had filled the airwaves earlier. Now, Sarah heard nothing but professional respect and genuine admiration from her squadron mates. Captain Stevens was the first to break the silence as they flew in formation toward home. Eagle-7, that was some of the finest flying I've ever witnessed. That second kill was absolutely textbook perfect. Even more surprising was the voice that came next. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been rescued by a search and rescue helicopter and was already back at the base, spoke through the radio from the control tower. Eagle-7, this is Morrison. I owe you an apology, and I owe you my thanks. When I was going down, I saw you take out the fighter that nailed me. You saved my life out there. Sarah felt a mixture of emotions as she listened to Morrison's words. The same pilot who had mocked her call sign that morning was now thanking her for saving his life. Combat had a way of stripping away pretenses and revealing what people were really made of. No apology necessary, Sarah replied simply. We're all on the same team out here. Colonel Rodriguez's voice filled the radio with warmth and pride. Eagle Squadron, this is Eagle-1. Outstanding mission, everyone. Eagle-7, those were 2 of the most impressive kills I've seen in 20 years of flying. You showed incredible skill and judgment under pressure. As they approached the airbase, Sarah could see crowds of personnel gathering on the flight line. Word of the aerial engagement had spread throughout the base, and everyone wanted to see the pilots who had successfully defended American airspace against a coordinated enemy attack. The landing was smooth and routine, but Sarah's heart was still racing from the adrenaline of combat. As her F-16 rolled to a stop on the tarmac, she took a moment to appreciate the fact that she had survived her first real air battle and performed beyond even her own expectations. Ground crew members rushed to her aircraft as she shut down the engines. Their faces showed a mixture of excitement and respect that she had never seen before. These were experienced maintenance personnel who had worked with fighter pilots for years, and they recognized exceptional performance when they saw it. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted man on the flight line, was waiting for her as she climbed down from her cockpit. "Captain Shun, that was one hell of a mission," he said with a grin. "2 confirmed kills on your first combat sortie. That's something special." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the positive reception she was receiving. After months of skepticism and doubt from her colleagues, she was finally being treated as a respected member of the fighter pilot community. The difference was striking and emotional. Colonel Rodriguez approached as Sarah finished her post-flight inspection. His expression was serious but proud. "Chun, I need to debrief you on that engagement, but first I want you to know how proud I am of your performance today. You didn't just fly well, you flew exceptionally well under the most challenging circumstances possible." The formal debriefing took place an hour later in the squadron's briefing room. Every pilot who had participated in the mission was present, along with intelligence officers who needed detailed information about the enemy aircraft and their capabilities. As Sarah described her engagement with the 2 enemy fighters, she noticed that her squadron mates were hanging on every word. These were experienced pilots who understood exactly how difficult it was to achieve 2 kills in a single engagement, especially for a pilot on her first combat mission. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been medically cleared after his ejection, stood up at the end of Sarah's presentation. "I want to say something to everyone here," he began, his voice serious and sincere. "This morning, I made some stupid comments about Captain Shun. I questioned whether she belonged in this squadron, and I suggested that she wasn't qualified to fly combat missions." The room was completely silent as Morrison continued. "I was wrong, completely wrong. Captain Shun didn't just prove herself today, she showed all of us what exceptional flying looks like. She saved my life out there, and she did it with skill that I can only hope to match someday." Morrison turned to face Sarah directly. "Captain Shun, I apologize for my comments this morning, and I want you to know that I would be honored to fly on your wing anytime, anywhere." The spontaneous applause that erupted from the other pilots was genuine and heartfelt. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized that she had finally achieved the acceptance and respect she had been seeking throughout her military career. Captain Stevens stood up next. "I've been flying fighters for 8 years," he said, "and I've never seen anyone handle a 2-versus-1 engagement the way Eagle-7 did today. That was graduate-level flying against professional opposition." Colonel Rodriguez called for attention as the applause died down. "I have some news to share with everyone," he announced. "Based on today's engagement and Captain Chin's exceptional performance, I am recommending her for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Additionally, effective immediately, Captain Shun is being promoted to flight leader position in this squadron." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the military's highest honors for aerial achievement, and being promoted to flight leader meant that Sarah would be responsible for training and leading other pilots in combat situations. As the formal debriefing concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow pilots who wanted to congratulate her and discuss the technical aspects of her engagement with the enemy fighters. The atmosphere was completely different from the cold reception she had experienced that morning. Over the following weeks, Sarah's reputation spread throughout the Air Force community. Her double kill on her first combat mission became the stuff of legend, and pilot training schools began using her engagement as a case study in superior air combat tactics. The most meaningful change, however, was the transformation in her relationship with her squadron mates. The respect she had earned through her performance in combat was genuine and lasting. She was no longer the outsider trying to prove herself, but a valued leader whom other pilots looked up to and learned from. Lieutenant Morrison became one of Sarah's strongest supporters and closest friends in the squadron. The experience of being shot down and rescued had given him a new perspective on what really mattered in military aviation. He often told other pilots that Eagle-7 was the finest combat pilot he had ever flown with. Captain Stevens requested to be assigned as Sarah's permanent wingman, recognizing that flying with her would make him a better pilot. Their partnership became one of the most effective two-pilot teams in the entire Air Force, with both pilots learning from each other and pushing each other to achieve higher levels of performance. Colonel Rodriguez's recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross was approved at the highest levels of the Air Force. The medal ceremony took place 3 months later, with Sarah's parents and fellow squadron members in attendance. As the general pinned the medal to her uniform, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The call sign Eagle-7 took on an entirely new meaning after that first combat mission. Instead of being a mocking reference to her supposedly bubbly personality, it became a symbol of excellence and courage that other pilots aspired to match. Young female pilots entering the Air Force began requesting assignments to Sarah's squadron, hoping to learn from someone who had broken through the barriers they faced. Sarah's success also had a broader impact on Air Force policies regarding female combat pilots. Her exceptional performance provided concrete evidence that women could excel in air combat roles, leading to expanded opportunities for female pilots throughout the military. The enemy pilots they had faced that day turned out to be part of an elite squadron from hostile nation, known for their exceptional training and advanced aircraft. The fact that Sarah had defeated 2 of their best pilots in single combat added to the significance of her achievement. Years later, Sarah would look back on that mission as the defining moment of her career. It was the day she proved to herself and everyone else that determination, skill, and courage were not limited by gender or background. The young pilot who had endured months of skepticism and doubt had emerged from combat as a respected leader and an inspiration to others. The story of Eagle-7 became more than just a tale of aerial combat. It became a symbol of perseverance, triumphing over prejudice, of skill overcoming skepticism, and of individual courage making a difference in the broader fight for equality and recognition. Sarah continued to fly combat missions throughout her career, eventually becoming a squadron commander and, later, a wing commander. She mentored dozens of young pilots, both male and female, teaching them that excellence in aviation was measured by performance in the cockpit, not by preconceptions or stereotypes. The mission that started with mocking comments about her call sign ended with the tower clearing Eagle-7 for takeoff on countless future missions, each one a testament to the respect she had earned through exceptional performance under pressure. The call sign that was once meant as an insult became a badge of honor, representing everything that was best about military aviation and the pilots who served their country with distinction. On quiet evenings at the base, Sarah would sometimes stand on the flight line and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. She would think about that first combat mission and smile, remembering how far she had come from a nervous young pilot who had faced such skepticism from her peers. The F-16s parked nearby represented more than just aircraft to her. They were symbols of opportunity, instruments of freedom, and reminders that excellence could overcome any obstacle. Every time she climbed into a cockpit, she carried with her the knowledge that she had earned her place through skill, courage, and determination. The tower would always clear Eagle-7 for takeoff, because Eagle-7 had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged in the sky, defending her country and inspiring others to reach for their own moments of greatness. Her call sign had become legend, and her story would inspire generations of pilots who would follow in her contrails across the endless blue sky.